$2.5 trillion. That's how much a new valuation model expects the enterprise value of SpaceX to be in 5 years from now. And get it, that's just the base case. The bull case is just over $3 trillion. Ark Invest and Mach33 have collaborated to develop this valuation model. I have Brian Wang with me today. He's a futurist thought leader and runs the prominent science blog nextbigfuture.com. Also with me is Gustav Andersson. He is a hand surgeon and associate professor of anatomy in northern Sweden. Welcome, gentlemen. It's great to have you both here with me on Over the Horizon today.
Great to join you.
Thanks for having us.
All right, Brian. So before we get into the weeds with this Ark Invest Mach33 SpaceX valuation, I have to ask you, have you ever seen like something like this? How do you even begin to model the valuation of a company that will, like, honestly, potentially be the single largest transformative vector for an entire planet, perhaps even two planets, Earth and Mars? Has there ever been any precedent for building such a valuation model?
Well, I've been involved actually with it. So before Mach33 became Mach33, they were Space Ventures, and they did fundraising and still do fundraising for SpaceX and other space companies. So I personally am invested in SpaceX via the SPVs models, and I've been involved in this space of people doing these secondary fundraising investor transactions related to SpaceX. And I worked with Space Ventures, put 2 pages into their prior SpaceX model. So I've done that before. And I also did economic analysis of several years ago for the Falcon 9 to say, okay, if you have X amount of reuse, how does that affect the cost to SpaceX of it? So I've been, circling around making these kinds of analysis projection, and then looking at specific Starlink and looking at the different types of customers, residential customers, business, RV users, to then build spreadsheet models of that. So that's how I've been doing it. They did it with a Monte Carlo method, where they took the variability of it. So instead of having one person doing and me doing, say, bear case, base case, bull case, right? Mm-hmm. The Monte Carlo method lets you do 100 variations on each one, each variable, to say, 0% of Starlink direct to cell phone is there, 100%, and then they then mix all those different 100 variations of this, 100 variations of that, in order to get to a distribution of model.
What in history can you compare this to? I mean,
I think
you haven't really had.
several...
Right. You haven't really had. I mean, apart from the British East India Company,
right.
What else is there to compare to this?
Well, you could say the entire United States. So basically, if you say, you go to the colonies up until, they're the full thing, then you could have the GDP of the United States, from the pre-colonial days. And there's been historical economists who've looked back, what's the valuation of Roman Empire, and then going forward into the colonies in Europe. And so they do that kind of thing, which basically works out to, because history didn't have much technology, number of people times a pretty fixed $300 per person, right?
Right.
So that was easier back then. So then you could have something similar for Mars, being number of people times a value per person, if you want to do an economic GDP of Mars. But the complication now is that we have AI and robotics. So then it could be human times productivity per human, robot times productivity per robot, AI times AI chip times AI chip productivity, sum those up. And then if the AI thing becomes dominant, then you're going to then drop out the first 2 terms to say, it's AI or robots. And they also have a productivity per launch, a productivity per satellite, right? Or like an economic value per thing, right? So those are ways to, and based upon how you're saying what matters, number of satellites. Right now there's I think about 8,000 Starlink satellites, and they're the version 2 minis. So if you go to version 3, which is the one that will launch with Starship, which are bigger, 9 bigger,
Right.
5 times the bandwidth, but they will launch 4 times, perhaps 10 times as many in each Starship launch. So then each launch will dump 20 times the bandwidth. So that's another metric we can do, like bandwidth per dollar thing, which is similar, kilowatt times to dollar productivity, because that's another energy is a type metric where when we went industrial revolution. So historically, the rise of industrial revolution and the rise of the United States entirely, and then looking at that globally, but the difference now, it could be compressed. Instead of over 100 years, 200 years, it could happen over, 10 to 30 years, right? Or depending on how things happen.
Yeah.
And in this case, it's a private company basically, which
Right.
perhaps have its
And they're already worth 350 billion
Yeah.
in terms of their
Yeah.
private valuation.
I can't help but also kind of wonder, like you spoke about the verticals, the Starlink, Optimus. When you look at Mars, it's also potentially a Cybertruck. These are like
Mhm.
key enablers of occupying Mars. Starlink, of
Mhm.
course, for communications infrastructure, Optimus for Mars labor,
Mhm.
Tesla vehicles for Mars transportation. Each of these is a vertical in its own right.
Mhm.
Is it fair to be effectively dovetailing these into the SpaceX valuation model at this point?
So I think that the valuation model is dominated by particular scenarios. So a scenario that I see being huge is not dependent upon the number of people, because getting people to Mars is still difficult, and they've been scaling a period. Elon wants to get to 1 million people there, say by 2050 or something like that. But you can get far more Tesla bots there.
Yeah.
And so there's a Tesla bot dominant model. And then my view is that it will be AI data centers that will matter. And that,
Interesting.
so currently XAI is building the largest data centers in the
Yeah.
world,
Cortex, right?
but within 6 to 9 months in Memphis, they will have 1 million of the latest B200 GPUs, NVIDIA
Right.
GPUs in there. So that's a gigawatt of power, maybe 2 gigawatts of power, powering 1 million GPUs, right? And they'll spend like $100 billion to do that. So
Yeah.
when you're talking $100 billion, the next step, say $1 trillion, that is aligned with the cost of sending fleet of ships to Mars, right?
Correct.
And then the
I mean,
2-year window.
and if you can take Stargate into consideration, that's even more, right? I mean, so the amount of
Right, people talking.
the potential of funds going into this, building our
Right.
data centers is humongous.
Right. So $500 billion for Stargate. There's other projects. I think Saudi's talking about $500 billion for theirs. There's Shark Tank investor Kevin O'Leary setting up a 7 gigawatt facility in Alberta. All these things, and now certain funds, they're not fully committed, and they're like only $20 billion initially, only $50 billion initially for the first few months until they get the land, the power and stuff scaled up. But if we're saying that things still scale, if the compute still scales, and the compute scaled up 70 times between GPT-2, OpenAI GPT-2, and OpenAI GPT-3, and another 70 times between GPT-3 to GPT-4, right? Those scalings of 70 times, if you round it off to 100, if you're scaling up that much each time, then if my next data center 100 times bigger, then I'm looking at 100 gigawatts versus 1 gigawatt, right? And I want that in 2 years or 4 years, right? And the next one after that, I want it to be 100 times bigger than that. So it's 10,000 times bigger in 4 years. So then that'd be the 2029 window or 2030 window going to Mars, right? So if I'm sending 100 starships over there, each with 100 tons in them, I can land 10,000 tons worth of chips and bots and stuff. If I can get the mining and building solar power and a very narrow construction thing of just building mass amounts of data centers, where I make one data center factory, and then in a year the bots make a second factory, doubling every 12 months, 6 months, whatever it is. After 10 doublings, I'm 1,000 times bigger. So if I go for exponential amount of AI data center on Mars, right? Mars can hold 20,000 terawatts of power. So it's solar is 40% less than
Yeah. So what's the mix?
Earth.
Is it just purely solar, or are you talking about nuclear as well?
I'm saying that you would go with solar because that's there. You can make solar panels. Nuclear, and I'm involved with nuclear companies. Um, that can do it too, but
Mhm.
you'd have to find uranium, which probably is there, but we haven't found it, right? Or like if you find like parts per billion in the dirt, you have to process, a billion tons of dirt to get, for every part per billion ton. So it's just
Yeah, but that's
it's
not
the
really
easier.
optimal, is it? To be mining for uranium or even thorium on Mars.
Because if you look around space, there's various places where it's at. In our oceans, we have 4 billion tons of uranium, right?
Hmm.
But it's in a parts per million level. And if you stick in membranes into it, you can collect that. And the price of mining uranium from the ocean is within a factor of 1 or 2 of the price to do it with regular mining, which is acid leaching out of it. So in our uranium reserves, we're at 10 to 20 million tons, but there's 4 billion tons in the ocean. So it's kind of like an oil sands of oil, where there's a huge amount there. It's just a matter of being able to efficiently get it. So in space, we know that there's certain asteroids that got a lot, but they'd be separate from Mars. So I could get high concentrations because the high concentration deposits on Earth probably came from exploded supernova and asteroids that hit the Earth. So there's rich deposits of uranium lying around the solar system, but and they could have had meteorites hit asteroids hit Mars and a moon, and we'd have to go find, hey, just like we have northern Saskatchewan has had something that hit, X billion years ago, something hit on Mars. So we could probably find it, but we have not. So the easier I want to build a massive data center on Mars fastest is power it with solar. And then I know I got 20,000 terawatts there. I can just do it because we have not got to the point where we're mass
And
producing.
what's your timeline for that? 20,000 terawatts.
Um, if you start the replication process, it would be probably about like uh, 10 to 20 years, probably 20 years after
Okay.
you get the million times scaling. So once I get 100 starships going to Mars, 1,000 starships going to Mars, I land a full payload. Each starship would have 1,000, 5,000 bots, and they'd have mining equipment. And then they would go for just the materials needed, steel, the heavy stuff I don't want to bring over there. And I would probably bring over the chips because making a fab, $20 billion is really difficult, right? So I would have the fabs here. So I want to make everything except the chips on Mars. So mining the steel, the solar panels, that kind of stuff, and then just bring shiploads of chips to Mars, and then I would power that up and make a massive data center. Starting off, with 1 terawatt. I think that might be a cutover point where you go from 10 gigawatts, 100 gigawatts on Earth, and then go to a terawatt on Mars, and then you can go up another 4 orders of magnitude up to 10,000 terawatts on Mars. So getting to the first 1 terawatt would be the huge value of something worth trillions of dollars there. It would be a significant size, and it wouldn't be covering the whole surface, but covering the whole surface is in the cards. And when Elon talks about Kardashev level 1, you would get to, right now we're at 1,000 times, 10,000 times away from Kardashev level 1. We're at like 0.72, but it's this exponential thing where every step up of Kardashev is like a billion, 10 billion times, right? Kardashev 1, planet, Kardashev 2, everything from the sun, Dyson sphere, and then whatever. So Mars would get us rapidly without any land problems, any ocean problems, getting us to 0.96 of Kardashev or 0.97 of Kardashev 1 without like
Yeah.
knocking over cities or doing whatever else.
So what's the
So
benefit
it's
putting a data
What?
center on Mars? What's the benefit?
What?
Or like putting the data center on in situ on Mars? What's the benefit? Is it the land basically, or is it cool instead of just building it here on Earth? Is there a
It's just the scale, because
Mm.
in order for us to do so, right now we're at 1 gigawatt, and we'll get to 10 gigawatts by taking all the natural gas from a particular location, right? But if I take 10 gigawatts of power, all the natural gas, I'm pretty much using up, like, the amount of gigawatts coming from Texas. I think it's 30 gigawatts,
Okay.
right? So if I double up Texas's natural gas production, I can get 30 gigawatts, right? And I'm be sucking out that natural gas, where I'm going to use it, the known reserves up in, instead of 6 decades, I'm down to 3 decades, right? But I don't care. I just need to have the AI working for a few years, right? I could dump it in Alberta, going from 10 to 15 gigawatts, or actually, I'm taking that back. I think it might be 100 gigawatts, 70 gigawatts for Alberta, and then 100 gigawatts for Texas. So getting up to the 100 gigawatt level by doubling natural gas in the most best locations, you can probably get to a couple of 100 gigawatt locations, but they would be a huge lift. I'd have to double the current level. Getting to 10 gigawatts, I think, is more immediately doable. The other way to do it would be China's producing 50 nuclear reactors, gigawatt level, standard nuclear reactors, take them 4 to 5 years, 6 years to build one. And they have
Yeah.
50 in process, and they complete 10 per year. If they were to crank that thing into 10x overdrive, they could then start completing 100 gigawatt reactors each year, right? But they would need to stick them all in one location to power one massive 100 gigawatt data center, right? But then there's cooling and geological problems, because you have 100 reactors all within, say, 20 mile radius of each other. If I have a big earthquake there or something hits, then I got a bunch of reactors there. And then also the amount of cooling, I would literally need to divert a river to do that, right?
Yeah.
So it's because we're getting to regional, near planetary scale things, like a river for water cooling, that
Yeah.
it is not insane anymore to say, well, we'll dump it on Mars, because the level of what we're doing, once we get beyond 10 gigawatts, going to 100 gigawatts, going to terawatt, is starting to be planetary scale, right?
Yeah,
So
but
then
also, yeah. So something you just said, it got me thinking about planetary defense, and we take planetary defense so seriously here on Earth, right? Now, I'm just going to play out this animation for you, and this was a meteoroid crashing into Mars in 2022, and that
yeah,
impacted around the equatorial region, and then just threw up these chunks of water ice that we didn't know existed in these regions on Mars before, right? Now, when you look at the first couple of decades, wouldn't it? I mean, and we've talked about this here on Over the Horizon before. The Boring Company is such a big player in piece of this puzzle, and
yeah,
perhaps the first 5, 10, 15 years even, you'd have human habitation that would be underground. One of the primary reasons for that would be planetary defense. And then if you have human habitation underground, wouldn't nuclear power make more sense? And we already know that GE, Westinghouse, they're all already got contracts from NASA to build miniature, power sources, nuclear power sources for the moon as part of the
yeah,
Artemis missions, right? So that could easily be adapted to, and it could you'd have a small miniature nuclear, power plant that you could just bung into, like one of the spaceships and send
yeah.
it off to Mars.
Yeah, so the thing is, for nuclear, because of the power that we're talking about, like, we're completing, like, the 8 Chinese nuclear reactors every year. So we're at, um, 15, 20 gigawatts per year. So the new nuclear, which is, okay, I don't need containment dome, I'm doing it different, maybe doing molten salt. Then you need to, one, make the first one, and the company that I know about hoping to complete the first ones by 2030, and you have a factory to make them. And then you make them, the complexity of the device might be like a Boeing 787 or something like that, like on that
Right.
scale, 100 megawatts, that size. And
Yeah.
then Airbus and Boeing make 2,000 combined of those each year. of the passenger planes. So if I made 2,000 planes and each one had 100 megawatts, then in theory I can make 200 gigawatts. But I would have to have the factories producing these at the scale of the airplane industry, right?
Yeah.
So, and then I'd also have to scale up nuclear enrichment, because those things are still using uranium and everything like that. And so my resources on that would need to scale up by another 10x, 100x too.
But it's
and
a
then
lot
the
more
mining,
practical
everything.
to send nuclear fuel to Mars rather than, these massive solar arrays, wouldn't it?
But I'm saying you're not going to send the solar arrays to Mars. I'm
Right.
saying that you're going to find a simplified form of solar power that uses less materials in a factory that I can send to Mars. And I'm going to airlift or rocket lift, when I'm sending 1,000 starships, I'm sending about half of the D-Day invasion to Mars, right? So then that means I'm sending, like 10,000 container ships of stuff to Mars, right? So then I can bring all this stuff. But I want to, anything steel, anything water, anything cement, all that stuff I want to get rid of, because I'm going to make it on Mars. And then I
Oh,
can get
okay.
water there. Yes, I can make that's on Mars. I can make water on Mars. I can make cement on Mars. I can get the steel, right? And so I want whatever the extra ingredient is that I don't have there. I want to shrink that down, like dry roasted coffee or whatever like that. I want to dehydrate it, suck it all out. So I'm only bringing what I have to bring, and whatever's heaviest is what I'm focusing on, not making it locally via mining, via robots, via something, right? And then getting to 100%, it's all there. But 100% all there could take 10, 20 years, particularly for really complicated stuff, right? But anything that's heavy, I want to make there. And the quickest ones to get rid of are anything with water, oxygen, CO2, cement, steel. Those things are there. So solar power, a lot of that is, you can make that thin film solar power. Something can roll out. So that you can really lighten that up. So where you're taking gigawatts of solar power to Mars and then making a factory, then I wouldn't have to take it. But with thin film solar, and there's stuff where they make it in sheets and roll it up, and I would not be as concerned about efficiency. Oh, it's only 10% efficient versus 30% efficient. But if it's 10 times more weight, I want to go for the how much power per ton am I bringing over there, right? Yeah.
So space-based solar, is that any part of this equation, or is that still just a pipe dream, like space-based solar where you have the rays?
So we can generate space-based solar power, and I've worked with some of the space-based solar companies. So we're right now generating power in space. Every Starlink satellite, 8,000 of them, generate 7 kilowatts of power. So they're just not beaming it anywhere. They're using it directly. Because the reason is, we have power here. I don't need you to beam me power. I can make a coal plant right next door, right? But for Starlink, I need to have 7 kilowatts there. And when I make version 3 satellites, maybe they're going to go to 50 kilowatts or 100 kilowatts for each version 3 satellite. And they can have version 4 with 200 kilowatts. So the power level and size of those satellites is comparable to the International Space Station, right? So they're using that power locally. So if I go to 100,000 version 3 satellites, each with 100 kilowatts of power, right? Then I'm looking at 10 gigawatts of power, right? But then you have to beam it, and they beam it with microwaves, which, same way we send communications to our cell phones, right? So you can do that, but then you have to, because of the size of it, it will spread out into something like a massive gigawatt solar farm, where it's going to spread out over 5 miles wide, right? So they can beam that down to Earth. For Mars, I don't need it because I have very thin atmosphere. So there's no advantage of sticking in orbit because I got no atmosphere to go through, right? So I just stick all my solar on Mars. So I'm further away, so I get 40% less, but I don't have the atmosphere, so it comes out to be about the same. So I would just build all my solar on the surface of Mars. And that would be what we would do to get to that huge amount of power. So the beaming of power is, we've only just lit up a small light bulb, so it can be done. And doing it via power levels of radio wave transmission can be done, but it's more generate the power in space, collect your solar power from the sun, and then use it where you're at. So all your space applications should just be about localized power rather than beaming it around. There are some use cases where you really want to beam things around, where it's like I want to send something, a laser beam of power over to Pluto or something like that. There's some other things that can go on there, but unnecessary for Mars. By the way, Mars is just a stepping stone to the entire solar system.
True.
People, Elon can say, "Oh yeah, I just want to be multiplanetary." Once you go from 1 to 2, 2 to 20 to 100 is a far easier step, because on Mars, when I have 1 million people or 1 billion bots, they will make 1 million starships and 10 million, 100 million Raptor engines, and they will spread out through the entire solar system, right? So getting Mars gets you the whole solar system, which gets you 10 million times more resources than everything. Which I only have a few minutes left, but and I apologize for that. Is that the valuation then is scenario dependent, because the first 5 years, okay, it's just how many more Starlinks do I have? How many more customers do I have? Do I have 100 million high bandwidth guys with Starlink dishes, or do I have 5 billion people getting Gen 5 speed communications from there directly to my cell phone? So there was a March ruling by the FCC that allowed SpaceX to increase the power transmission by 10 times. That was huge, because that means it increased the decibel level to transmit the stuff by 10 times, which means you can go through a simple wall, a drywall wall.
Which is one of the problems with 5G, right? Versus 4 and 6G.
Well, from
the distance
satellite, for the satellite. So you probably need to still have antennas inside your phones to increase the gain. But the speed of communication can go then from 2G speeds up to 4 and 5G speeds because of the increased power. So that makes it possible, which hopefully T-Mobile and the other 7 partners that SpaceX has will then broadly roll out this direct to cell phone communications on Earth. So the valuation model is how much of the direct to cell phone market do you get? How much do you grow your direct internet communications? And then and those two are the main ones. There's also some stuff about moving cargo and stuff like that beyond 2030. And then, because it can take over all air cargo, it goes 20 times faster. And then does the Mars data center or other major industrialization of Mars scenario happen, which then changes the whole valuation of it, which ultimately more potential.
But then Elon has said that that Starlink will IPO. So if that is spun out, that will also affect the long-term valuation for SpaceX, won't it?
Right. Because then if the IPO right now, the 350 billion, so next they IPO at $2 trillion next year. Once they got, okay, we have the first 100 million cell phone customers, we're going to get 1 billion customers. It's all very predictable. We have already 6 million the satellite customers. That's going to go to 20, 30 million, and then 100 million, and then so they can very clearly see, okay,
they've just entered the Indian telecom market, which is one of the biggest in the world.
Yeah. So you go from $20 billion of revenue with $10 billion of profit, which was up from 10 billion of revenue with no profit last year, to $100 billion with $80 billion of profit. So they just go insanely high margin as they go forward. And that goes to the valuation model of 2030 being 3 trillion, is that 30 PE, but $100 billion of profit. And then it's a $3 trillion thing. Right. It's because their costs of launching don't necessarily go up that much. And then once I deploy 100,000 satellites, version 3 up there, I can serve the whole planet and stuff like that and continue to upgrade. And their cell phone partners would say, I'm going to give you 1/3 of my bandwidth. I'm going to give half the profits, because you're going to take out half of my cell tower costs. I don't need to
Mm.
do anything out in the rural areas anymore. And then we share this big thing. And then SpaceX and Starlink say, okay, you're my good partners because I don't want, UK or other governments being freaked out that I've killed their phone company. I will
But
work with their phone
that's
company.
inevitable, isn't it? I mean, how can you compare terrestrial with satellite?
No, it's because they're so dominant that they choose not to kill them and geopolitically work with their partners to make them profitable. To say, okay, we're going to do a 50-50 or 30-60 where I take the smaller cut. So I can
Right.
go global without everyone freaking out. If you had one thing that took over the whole world, then everyone would go, holy crap, they took over the whole world. As opposed to they're
Oh,
working with everyone, right?
yeah. But then you have
Right. So
competitors like AST, although it's really tiny. The Chinese are trying to do something.
yeah,
You've got OneWeb. So
yeah,
do you think it's still going to
because they're
be
already at
that massive?
90% of all payload. Then they're going, once they get the Starship not blowing up, they go to 99.9%. They're way ahead. So they will,
So late.
pull away. It's like that multi-decade Boeing thing, but without Boeing getting fat and lazy and firing their engineers, right?
Yeah.
So I apologize that I have to go. I'll
No,
have to join
it's
you next
wonderful
time.
talking to you. Thank you so much for your time. And I want to go down so many different rabbit holes with you on this, and I really hope you'll come back and talk to us and
I
geek
will.
out with us here on Over the Horizon. So thank you
Okay.
so
Thank you.
much, Brian,
Thank
and
you.
it's lovely to have you. Thank you, Gustav.
Thank you,
Always
Gustav.
great to have you.
Yeah. See you around.